Hi everybody, welcome back to our professional development webinar series brought to you by Ave Maria Press. Our goal in this series is to provide you, parish staff, and diocesan volunteers, volunteers and diocesan ministers with the formation, training, and tools that you need to create vibrant Catholic parishes and growing ministries. Today's webinar, The Wedding Banquet, Inviting Couples to Experience Divine Love, Karee Santos will help you integrate practical tips and theological truths into your marriage preparation programs. My name is Jared Dees. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager at Ave Maria Press. I'll be moderating today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you exclusively in a partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priests Councils. As always, everyone in the audience is muted, but you are able to ask questions, and questions may be sent to our presenter using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed here. I'll read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. I'd also like to note this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out to you later this week. So with that, I want to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter today, Karee Santos. Karee is a Catholic blogger and speaker and writer for the Catholic Match Institute. She has written numerous articles on marriage and family for the National Catholic Register, Catholic Digest, Faith and Family Magazine, Catholic Lane, Amazing Catechists, and alatia.org. She blogs at Cana, and she and her husband, Manny, designed and taught a pre-Cana marriage preparation course in New York City for 2 years. And they are also the co-authors of a new book, The 4 Keys of Everlasting Love. So Karee, thanks so much for being with us and presenting today.
Thank you, Jared.
Hand controls over to you.
Okay, here we go. Welcome everyone to the Wedding Banquet, inviting couples to experience divine love. This webinar is meant for people in marriage ministry to address some of the problems that we often experience in reaching couples through pre-Cana and marriage enrichment programs. Now, my husband and I wrote the book, The 4 Keys to Everlasting Love, as a tool, a help for couples and also for family life ministers to learn more about the practical and the spiritual wisdom that the Catholic Church does offer marriages today. We started writing the book about 10 years ago when we designed and taught a pre-Cana course in New York City based on the teachings of John Paul II. We looked around at that time for a book that would go along with our course, but we were unable to find anything that addressed a broad enough range of topics to fulfill the Vatican's instructions in their document, The Preparation for the Sacrament of Marriage. So we went ahead and we wrote our own. What I'm going to be doing today is to use some examples from our book on how to reach couples on 3 different levels. First of all, the personal level. Second of all, the practical level. Third of all, the spiritual level. And what this multi-level approach does is it invites couples to experience not only human love, but the divine love of God our Father and of Jesus Christ, His Son, because that's what we know will truly bring them to happiness. So let's start with the parable of the wedding banquet from the Gospel of Matthew. As you probably know, the Bible frequently uses an analogy of marriage to express a relationship between God and His people. And we also know that an invitation to a sacramental marriage is more than an invitation to experience human love. It's really an invitation to experience heaven. So we see here that Jesus is creating an analogy between the kingdom of heaven and a wedding banquet. And he says, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. So here's the first problem that we run into in the parable. Then in the second half of the parable it says, the king then said to his slaves, go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. So that's the second problem highlighted in this parable, the problem of unpreparedness. You've got the guests who don't want to come, the invited guests who don't want to come, and the others who aren't prepared. And these two problems correspond to challenges that we face as marriage ministers in today's world with the couples who are coming to us. The first two challenges on this list, apathy and closed-mindedness, they relate to these invited guests who don't want to come. You have a lot of pre-Cana couples who do show up just because they're checking off a box. They don't really expect to learn anything. They don't really, they're not really open to learning anything, which is a problem also of closed-mindedness. Some couples already have a very fixed idea of what kind of marriage they want. It's based on secular ideas, often from the media, perhaps from their peers or even from their parents, and they don't really want to hear a different way. They don't expect that anything could be any better. Now, the second set of challenges here, lack of catechesis and a disconnect between competence and content, these are really related to the problem of unpreparedness. So first of all, we've got a problem with the couples and their lack of catechesis. Frequently, the last time they've sat in a catechism class is going to be in their 9th grade or 8th grade preparation for the sacrament of confirmation. And maybe they haven't even been to Mass very much since then. So as the average age of couples getting married inches up into the late 20s, you have a very large gap in terms of time between when they sat there having their 9th grade catechesis and when they walk into your home or your classroom or the auditorium where you're presenting. So that's a large gap that we as instructors need to overcome. In addition, sometimes, although definitely not always, there's a lack of catechesis on the part of the instructors. Instructors, we are dedicated, we are hardworking, but we don't always have the time to go ahead and read the catechism, to read the papal encyclicals, and the program directors, even if they're reading the documents, don't necessarily have the time to put together training or retraining programs for the instructors. So there's definitely some benefit that can come from an additional or a higher level of catechesis for instructors. And this last challenge is a disconnect between core competence and content. The core competence of the church is really spiritual or theological. Unfortunately, the main focus of some pre-Cana programs is really practical content. So what you have is instructors who are being asked to step outside their field of expertise and speak about things like communication or finances with devoid of any spiritual content. And that's not particularly helpful for the couples because the instructors are not exploiting this core competence, the spiritual wisdom that the church has to offer. So the way we overcome these challenges is we are called to explain to the couples who come before us, to show these couples that sacramental marriage and sacramental marriage prep is not a benefit, it's actually a burden. And we need to reframe this preparation for the sacrament of matrimony as an invitation rather than only an obligation. In addition, we want to marry, so to speak, the practical and the theological content which is in our courses. Now, the way that we make this invitation to couples, an invitation to human love, and again, divine love of God our Father and Christ His Son, is that we make this a personal invitation from us to them. This can be very hard to do, to relate to couples on a personal level. A lot of catechists have taken as their mantra this statement here from Pope Paul VI, that modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses. So how do we witness our love of Christ, our love of the church, our joy in our own marriages? How do we witness that to couples? Well, what we need to do is to reveal parts of our lives with both vulnerability and a certain degree of humility. We need to tell people stories. Stories are an excellent teaching tool. Of course, it's why Jesus depended on parables more often than not to get his message across. But we have to choose the right stories. We have to ask ourselves some questions in choosing which personal stories to share with the couples who come to us. And the first question to ask is your story universal? Now, my husband and I tell a lot of stories in our book, and I'll give some examples of a few stories and sort of analyze their appeal. Are they universal or not? And one set of stories that we tell in the book is related to our large family. We're the parents of 6 kids. And so we have a lot of funny stories that go along with being a large family and the types of comments that people say. However, this type of story is not going to have a universal appeal when it comes to standing up in front of a room full of millennials, of 20-somethings, who may not really be sure whether they want to have children or not, aren't really considering having children soon, and certainly not so many. So our stories about a large family are not going to be the most universal stories that we can tell. We also tell stories about my husband's health difficulties. He has had 4 brain tumors over the years, and while these stories do tap into the universal theme of sickness, and that's picked up in the marriage vows, this idea of promising to be together through sickness and health, it still is not necessarily going to be close to the personal experience of the couples who are actually showing up in front of us. So that's not going to be our most universal story. The closest, the most universal story that we actually tell is about the personality differences that my husband and I have. He is an extrovert. He loves to party. He loves to be in big groups of people, and I'm very much an introvert. I like to stay home and read a book. So we tell stories about how that affected us during the time that we were dating, and how he thought if he brought 10 friends along, it still counted as a date, and I disagreed with him. So you're going to have a lot of couples being able to relate to that. Most people view themselves as either an extrovert or an introvert, and many people wind up attracted to the opposite personality type. So this is going to be the story that we would choose as the most universal story, and in fact we do begin our book with that story because it is the most relatable. Now the second question to ask when you're choosing a personal story is, does your story illustrate your point? One danger, particularly in unstructured pre-Cana classes, is that it can degenerate into storytelling. And these stories don't necessarily illustrate points. They could be about grandchildren or pets, but they don't have much to do with the lessons we're trying to teach in pre-Cana. So what I actually did to come up with an example of this was I Googled pre-Cana and pointless. This is definitely not for the faint of heart. One of the stories that I came up with was the following. Imagine, if you will, bad actors reading a bad play in a mediocre theater with shoddy equipment in front of a captive audience of miserable critics. The scene was about a couple, married presumably, who were deciding where to go for dinner. One of the scenarios resulted in conflict, the other results in going to dinner. The scene didn't speak much to me, nor did it seem to speak much to anyone in the room. If it was speaking to them, they weren't listening. Ouch. You know, this is a description of a pre-Cana class written by a participant who obviously didn't think that the instructors had chosen a story that had a point and that demonstrated it clearly. So it's very important to pick a story with a point and a very clear point. Now the third question to ask when choosing a story is, does your story teach the truth? In particular, does it teach truths of the Catholic faith? I was present during a pre-Cana session being taught by someone else where the instructor told a story about her grandchild who was being told by the priest that it was a mortal sin to skip Mass on Sunday. And the child's parents did not bring him to Mass every Sunday. So the child was extremely upset by what the priest had said. What the instructor then went ahead and told all of the students sitting in front of her in this pre-Cana class was that it didn't matter if you went to Mass every Sunday as long as you had a personal relationship with Jesus. Now that's simply not true. What the instructor said is in the catechism that we're obligated to go to Mass every Sunday. So she had chosen a personal story with a message, but that message wasn't in line with the doctrine of the Catholic Church, and that becomes a very delicate, dangerous, and unpleasant situation in the midst of a pre-Cana class. So when we're choosing our personal stories, really, we have to ask again these three questions. Does the story apply universally? Does it illustrate a relevant point? And does it teach the truths of the Catholic faith? Now, the next section, I'd like to talk about some of the practical content that is offered in a pre-Cana course. Couples tend to respond very well to practical content. They want the life hacks. They want the tips to make their life easier, happier, more organized. And so what we've done, what we did in our program that we designed and what we did in our book, is we came up with 9 categories of helpful content, and we'll talk about that here today, and also some different ways to present it. Now, in the following section on theology, I'll talk about how to show that God and the collective wisdom of the Catholic Church can make their lives easier and happier too. Okay, so these first few categories of content, the number one is personality differences or communication. And that's really the ideal entrance point. It's the most expected when couples come to pre-Cana, and it's the least controversial. So what you can do is you can present particular communication techniques, like you need to schedule a regular and uninterrupted time to talk, whether it's every night at bedtime or perhaps on a weekend, or if you get too angry, take a time out, write down your perspective, or agree to talk the next day. So that's a way to ease into the practical content of pre-Cana. That segues pretty naturally into talking about in-laws. This is something that most every couple deals with, a bit of a conflict with in-laws, and it's really a matter of setting priorities. For example, does the husband put his wife first or his mom first? So it's frequently an issue of setting boundaries. The next question, the next topic on the number 3 is of work-life balance. When people are single, frequently work is their top priority, or perhaps they need to balance work and friendships. But after they're married, they're balancing work and their spouse and their friends. And when kids arrive, they really start a juggling act. So couples like to know how they can maneuver through those transition points in their lives. Number 4 on the list is finances. Many couples identify money troubles as the leading cause of their divorce, and studies also show that the more frequently couples argue over money, the more likely the marriage is to fall apart. So communicating about finances is really a matter of balancing the competing desires of the spouses, their competing priorities. Do they want to save or spend? Do they want to purchase entertainment related things, or they want to spend on education? Do they want to give to charity? And a lot of couples run into financial conflicts during the wedding planning stage, and this is a chance for us to give them some helpful tips on how to navigate through that. Number 5 on the list, community service. is great because young adults really like it. This is frequently stressed in confirmation programs. It's a big priority of Pope Francis, who is very popular, and people are inspired by it. So that's a nice thing to include in terms of practical content. Now we've got 4 more topics here on the list. Each of them gets a chapter in our book. These relate to sexuality, fertility, special family circumstances, including special needs parenting, and the education, parenting and education of children. So these topics tend to be the most controversial. Frequently, when you're talking to couples about sexuality, you're dealing with couples who have a great deal of woundedness. And they may have had past relationships that are interfering in the marriage relationship, and they like to know how to deal with these troublesome spots. And sometimes they have trouble communicating. It's good to give them tips about communicating without any shyness or bruising any egos, and how to think of each other's needs first, and not demanding or withholding sex, not using it in some sort of power play. Now, number 7, in terms of practical content, the issue of fertility. This came up in our course that we taught in New York City. In fact, at the 1-year anniversary mark after our first pre-Cana class, we had a reunion, and the biggest issue that the couples wanted addressed was infertility, because nearly half of the couples who had shown up for our pre-Cana class were experiencing issues with infertility. So a lot of couples take fertility for granted, and this is something that that it's actually a great gift. The ability to have children is a great gift, and it's actually not open to everyone. Sometimes also couples haven't discussed how many kids they want. There's a particular technique where you have the couples stand back to back and hold up a number of fingers that corresponds to the number of kids that they want to have. In one story, the man held up a 0 and the woman held up a 5, and when they turned around and looked at each other, they were astonished. So it's good to get couples talking about these things before they actually walk down the aisle. With respect to special needs children, number 8 on the list, in our area in particular, the New York City area, there are very high rates of autism. There's also Down syndrome, and the Catholic Church has a wonderful perspective in recognizing the value of these children and seeing the parenting of these children as a real call to heroism. So more and more these days, this is a relevant topic for people coming in to pre-Cana. Number 9 on the list is parenting. This is something that couples may not face for a few years, but frequently they can look back at the way that they were raised and decide for themselves whether they want to follow what their parents did or sometimes do the opposite. Also, this can be where religious differences become quite crucial, whether they'll decide to raise the children in the faith or whether there's some kind of resistance to that. Now, some practical ways to give this content, to present this content to couples include the questionnaires or inventory tools. One of them is called Focus, and 2 different ways to do that. One is self-analysis, the other is guided analysis. In self-analysis, they treat it as kind of a pass-fail. And they show up with the pre-Cana instructors and are told how many red flags they got, and are relieved to be told that they can still marry each other after all. Sometimes they do take the time to discuss the questions that they answered, and sometimes they don't. So I think perhaps a better way, if there's the time to do it, is a kind of guided analysis, where the instructor will sit down for a few minutes or even longer to walk the couples through the inventory report and really customize the instruction. Now, if you want to do the guided analysis, that's probably going to work better in a small group format than in the large 1 or 2 day weekend classes. That's one of the benefits of doing the small group evening class. That format works best in a strong parish community where couples are coming to Mass, they see each other around the church, they are eager to join a group and be supported by other couples. And the organizing of the classes over several weeks also gives the couples the chance to digest the material. But where the small group classes don't work is in a community where couples really don't have the time to show up every week, and a lot of couples do prefer to go to the 1 or 2 day weekend classes. And the downside to that is that it's difficult to treat a large number of topics in depth in only 1 or 2 days. Now, the format that the textual materials can come in is workbooks and worksheets, which couples tend to like and instructors tend to like because they're short, they're simple, they have a lot of visual appeal. However, they don't tend to go in depth. And a full text, of course, is going to give far more information, but couples don't necessarily have the time. If you have the small group evening classes, you can ask them to read a chapter before they show up to the evening classes, but in a weekend format, that's really impossible. So what some of the weekend formats do is they'll use both. They'll give the couples the workbooks or the worksheets. They'll also offer them a full text to take home as a reference afterwards. I think that's a great way to do it because frequently couples don't know what's going to go wrong until it goes wrong, and then they wish they had paid a little more attention in pre-Cana. So how are we doing on time, Jared?
You're doing good. Keep it up.
All right. How many minutes we got?
Sorry. You have about 15 more minutes until we want to do the Q&A.
Perfect. Okay, we are going on to the theological section. Okay, so in the theological content that is presented in pre-Cana, we've got some topics that are mainly theological and some that are a blend of both practical and theological. It's important to remember, it's important for both the couples and the instructors to remember that pre-Cana is a type of sacramental prep, like for First Communion, like for First Penance, like for confirmation. And hopefully, most of the people coming to pre-Cana will have gone through both First Communion and confirmation, and they'll be aware that their parents placed a high priority on sacramental preparation, and hopefully they'll have these fond memories and they'll understand why it is that the church wants them to participate in this preparation for the sacrament of matrimony. The theological topics that are my top 3 heavy hitters for a pre-Cana course are sacramentality, prayer, and imitating the Holy Family. And in a discussion of sacramentality, it's important to stress that there is, in fact, a difference between sacramental and secular marriage. You get so many graces from a sacramental marriage, graces that come from inviting God to your wedding banquet. And He is, in fact, the only perfect partner in your marriage. You're both human. Wife is human. A husband is human. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to let each other down, in fact. And during those times of crisis, it's really that divine love, that love of God, and that presence of God in the marriage, which is going to get them through the hard times. That's what's going to lead them all the way to that everlasting love that they really dream of. So this is crucial, the sacramentality of the Catholic marriage. And the second topic here is prayer. Inviting the couples to prayer is inviting them into a closer relationship with Jesus It can also help make them more peaceful, help them to be more committed to each other. It really nourishes this life of grace. It nourishes their soul, and he allows them to love each other because he first loved them. And a prayer is really where you experience that love of Christ, which you can then share with each other. And thirdly, third theological topic is imitating the Holy Family. This may come as a surprise to a lot of Americans. It's a heavily Protestant influenced culture. But one of the surprises that came out of the questionnaires that were distributed worldwide before Pope Francis's Synod of the Family was that there is a lot of devotion to the Holy Family, to St. Joseph, to our Blessed Mother, to the child Jesus. And this is perhaps particularly in Latin American communities where Pope Francis is from. But this great devotion to the Holy Family is going to inspire people and remind them of the great gift of their Catholicism and their Catholic marriage. So in the previous section, I went over the 9 practical topics, and now I've just gone over the 3 theological topics. Our book has a chapter on each one. Now the question is, how do you marry the practical and the theological content? How do you add theological content and theological perspective to those practical tips so that you're giving couples something that they can't get anywhere else? And we have fantastic tools within the church to do that. We've got the Catechism of the Catholic Church. We've got, of course, the Bible, sacred scripture itself, which is going to appeal to both Protestants and, to the extent that you draw from the Old Testament, to Jews as well. It has a very broad appeal. The encyclicals of Pope St. John Paul II are a treasure trove of wisdom that that can be handed on to couples. And of course, Pope Francis is so popular these days. He speaks simply, and couples really like him. So it's good to try and throw in a few quotes from Pope Francis as well in your pre-Cana presentations. So let's go sort of step by step through those 9 practical topics and see what information we have that we can add from this theological and spiritual perspective. First of all, we have communication. I think one of the best pieces of advice on communication ever comes from the New Testament in St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians. He says, "Do not let the sun go down on your anger." And this is just terrific because it's common sense advice, and what it says is try and calm down enough before you go to sleep to say sorry, to kiss your spouse, to hug your spouse, to let go of that resentment and not let it turn into a grudge. So this is homespun wisdom that anybody, any engaged couple or married couple coming to us is really going to benefit from and appreciate. Secondly, with respect to in-laws, the Catechism has a lot on in-laws, on relationships between parents and children, because of course it stems from the 4th commandment of honoring your father and mother. What the Catechism says is, as they grow up, children should continue to respect their parents. Obedience toward parents ceases, not so respect, which is always owed to them. So it's a nice explanation of how our obligations to our parents change when we get married. It shows how our priorities become our marriage rather than our family of origin, but that we still owe this duty of respect not only to our own parents, but of course our spouse's parents as well. With respect to this topic of work, there's a very famous quote by Pope John Paul II, "Work is for man, not man for work." It's a catchy one-liner, and what it means is that the person who does the work and the person who receives the benefit of that work are both more important than the work itself. And this, I think, has a distinct appeal for millennials who want to know that their work means something. And when you view it from this personal or personalistic perspective, what you see is that every kind of work is done by a person and to benefit another person, and it has deep meaning. With respect to finances, again from Pope John Paul II, he has this great quote from his letter to families. Once man begins to lose sight of a God who loves him, earthly life becomes nothing more than a desperate search for gain, and financial gain before all else. Now, there are some people, again, particularly in our area, who are always chasing after that higher salary, the bigger house, and they never seem to be satisfied. And what Pope John Paul II has done here is he's put a name to that dissatisfaction, and he's explained what the reason is. And the reason is that we've lost sight of God, and by putting God back into our sights, so to speak, we actually become more satisfied. And that's something that everybody wants. With respect to service, Pope Francis comes riding to the rescue in his Holy Thursday homily of 2013. He says, "It is not in soul-searching or constant introspection that we encounter the Lord. The power of grace comes alive and flourishes to the extent that we, in faith, go out and give ourselves and the gospel to others." And again, what's particularly characteristic of millennials is that they want to know that they're making a difference in the world, that they can make a difference in the world. And Pope Francis assures them that through serving the poor, through going to the outskirts, through serving our communities, we are in fact making a difference in the world. And that's very inspiring. Next, coming to the slightly more controversial topics, I love this quote from the Catechism on sexuality. "Sexuality is a source of joy and pleasure." I just like to watch the jaws drop. People can't believe that the Catholic Church has that to say about sexuality. Fertility, we have this lovely quote from Pope John Paul II, again from his letter to families. "The birth of a new child fully reflects the victory of life over death brought about by the Lord's resurrection." So this is an idea that a child is truly a sign of hope for the future, a gift to the world, to his parents, to his family. And you're not just dealing with a rugrat here. You're really dealing with a newly created soul, and that there's something much more valuable about a child seen from a religious perspective, from a Catholic perspective, than from a secular perspective. The Catholic Church also has a great deal of compassion, has always had a great deal of compassion towards those who are sick and suffering. So with respect to special needs children, the Catechism points out that the family should live in such a way that its members learn to care and take responsibility for the young, the old, the sick, the handicapped, and the poor. And again, this is kind of a service to your family and to the world. It's a life-changing type of charity or love for others that, that is truly a call to heroism. And people these days, even still, they long to be heroes on some level. And they like to know that if they're called upon to be that kind of hero, that they can do it with God's help. And the last practical content that practical topic that can benefit from an infusion of theological content is, of course, parenting. John Paul II has said, "So great and splendid is the educational ministry of Christian parents that St. Thomas Aquinas has no hesitation in comparing it with the ministry of priests." Parents are called upon to educate their children and take care of their children on a physical, intellectual, and moral level. And this is quite a calling. And as parents help their children grow in age and grace, they frequently experience tremendous personal growth themselves. And in actuality, they learn how to love. So in conclusion, the church has wisdom and inspiration to offer on every issue facing couples today. When we offer this wisdom to couples, we are helping to nourish their souls, and we're also inviting them to join in the wedding banquet of heaven itself. Sacramental marriage and sacramental marriage prep is much more than an obligation. It's really an invitation to love. So as we say, my husband and I, in the introduction to our book, and they lived happily ever after. Wouldn't you like that to be the story of your marriage, the story of your life? God wants to give that life to you. His love for you is unmatched in power, intensity, depth, and tenderness. If you want to learn how to love and be loved forever, there is no greater teacher than the love of Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Great, Karee. Thank you so much for your presentation. We've got some questions coming in already, and I want to invite everyone else to continue to ask their questions. Let me take controls over to me, and then you don't have to worry about what's on your screen, Karee. Okay, so just as a reminder, you can see here the question section of the GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to go ahead and ask any of your questions at this time. So Karee, well, first of all, I'd like to review quickly. One of the things I loved most about what you said was that the beginning about making those personal stories not only just interesting, but also kind of important or relevant to marriage prep. So the three questions I wrote down, and I wonder if you could talk about it some more, about how you apply this when you're coming up with a talk, say, or planning marriage preparation classes. You said, is your story universal? Does your story illustrate your point? And does your story teach the truth? Can you say more about how you apply those three questions to your own personal preparation when you're talking to a group of married couples?
Well, it really, it's a function of knowing your audience. So sometimes it's possible to send out, say, feedback sheets ahead of time and to ask the couples certain questions about their relationship, about their life together. And then you get an idea of who they are before they walk in the room. And you can pick and choose the best stories based on what you know about the couples. Of course, feedback sheets after the fact are also very helpful. They'll tell you very often in very strong terms whether they found your stories to be universally appealing, to be relevant, and to be helpful. So those are some tools that are extremely helpful. Of course, if you know who your audience is ahead of time, this task is going to be a little bit easier. If you're speaking to a schooling association, for example, you know that most of the people in the audience either have big families or come from big families, and so our stories about our 6 kids are going to be much more relevant, much more appealing to that kind of an audience.
That's really helpful. Thank you. My wife and I have given talks at marriage preparation, retreats and at marriage enrichment nights, and I found that it's very difficult to plan talks together. At least we had a difficult time. And Karee, you've prepared these talks with your husband and written books. Do you have any advice that you'd give to couples who are maybe giving talks at a marriage retreat or a marriage event for the first time on how to sit down with your spouse and talk about your own marriage and stories that you might share, and planning out what you're going to say? Does that make sense?
Well, Yes, it absolutely makes sense. And it's a real opportunity for growth in your marriage because to commit to this joint project together, which is played out on a very public stage, it requires a lot of tact and a lot of discretion and a lot of ability to work together in a new way. So sometimes it can be easiest to start off with dividing up the talks or the topics and deciding ahead of time. For example, if you're going to be giving 2 talks that day, the husband would take one entire talk and then the wife would take another entire talk. That's sort of the easiest way to divvy up the responsibilities first time around so that you're not stepping on each other's toes. A more advanced way to do that is to write the outline of the talk together. Say you have 4 topics or 6 topics, divide them up so that the husband can take half and the wife can take half and organize it in such a way that you can alternate.
Good. I like that. It's very good practical advice there. Um, we've got some great questions coming in, so I'm going to start reading some of them, paraphrasing some. Josh asks about, he says, what are some effective ways you have found to inspire couples who are living together to embrace God's plan in church's teaching for them to live chastely before their wedding day? Do you have any advice, Karee, in your experience with marriage prep?
Yeah, this is a big deal. Those feedback sheets that I was talking to you about, there's a Christopher West course that we teach for sometimes in the Archdiocese of Newark, and it specifically asks that question of couples before they walk in, are you living together? And the vast majority of couples are in fact living together, but they are also open to the idea that that not living together or not sleeping together, at least before the wedding, will make that wedding night more special. And if you suggest that to them, they're surprisingly open to it.
That's good. That's good advice. John asks about a similar challenge, I guess, referring to those challenges he talked about at the very beginning of the webinar. John says, given the apathy and closed-mindedness of many couples that you mentioned, how do you foster the kind of internal motivation that is aligned with invitation as opposed to external motivation such as obligation?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I think John is just kind of curious if you have any thoughts on how to make that flip, from that you talked about at the very beginning from obligation to invitation. How do you get them to get excited about maybe coming to marriage preparation?
Well, I think it's hard to get them excited ahead of time. Once they're there, I think the personal touch really makes a difference. To meet them at the door, to shake their hand. This works even if you're in one of these large one-day sessions where you've got hundreds of couples showing up, where you just take the time to meet them, to greet them, to express that you're happy that they're there, and really let your own love of the faith shine through.
Good, thank you. Rosemary asked, and I think I prompted this a little bit, Karee, too, but she asked if you can share the slides, and I think she's really interested in those quotes, and I totally agree. I think the quotes that you found and the time you put into aligning those great quotes with the the content, the practical issues. Yeah, would you be willing to maybe send that out, or even I know you've been sharing some quotes on Twitter right now, so maybe that'll be a place where you can distribute them as well. But
Well, I would be happy to share the PowerPoint, certainly, but in addition, all of those quotes are in our book, either directly as they were in the presentation or paraphrased. So that's all material that I took from the book.
Awesome, thank you. Just reading through some of the different questions here. Thank you. Thanks for taking a minute. Jay is asking a question about addiction, and maybe maybe we can just broaden the question a little bit and ask about, addressing the topics of sexuality in general. You mentioned this in your presentation about sexuality, and I'm really glad at the way you talked about fertility. I think that hopefully is an eye-opening experience for many couples about fertility. But with sexuality and the challenges that maybe that couples would have to church teachings maybe, but also just personal issues with sexuality. Any tips on how to address that appropriately in a marriage preparation program in general?
Well, again, Christopher West has some great materials on this. Not only does he have books on the theology of the body, which was originally presented by Pope St. John Paul II as a series of addresses. Christopher West has a lot of books on the theology of the body. He also has a pre-Cana supplement program that specifically addresses the idea of sacramentality and sexuality together. And it really goes back to the book of Genesis, which is a very rich description of why we were created male and female, why we have the bodies that we do, and why it is that they're capable of coming together and generating new life. So there's this rich tradition and history in the church of this biblically based idea of sexuality, and it's really wonderful. Couples can respond very well to it when it's presented from that background.
Good, thanks. Some great positive encouraging words coming for you, Karee. So great job today in the presentation. Joyce is asking for a specific quote. I wonder if you can scan back through your PowerPoint and just read it for us again. She would like you to read that quote starting the birth of a child. I don't know if you could find that real quickly.
I should be able to do that. That was that was tied in our book with a specific personal story about us the whole family showing up to my grandfather's funeral. It was the first death of a close family figure, and my eldest daughter, Leah, had just been born, and her cousin Andy had just been born, and Andy was there at the funeral and making noise, and we were all afraid, the family was all afraid, that the people who were there in the church would object to the sounds of a baby. And so many people came up to us and said, we are so happy to hear the sound of a child during a funeral because it reminds us that life goes on. And when I found this quote from Pope John Paul II, it reminded me so strongly of that own experience in my life. And here's the quote. It's from his letter to families, and it's in paragraph number 11. What it says is, the birth of a new child fully reflects the victory of life over death brought about by the Lord's resurrection.
Thank you. You just shared a story from the book, and a lot of people, we've had a few questions that have just come in about the book. Some are calling it a workbook, and some are asking when the book's available and ordering multiple copies for their marriage ministry. I just want to, well, first I want to just clarify it. It's not a workbook so much as a book. And I'm just looking at it, Karee. I think what you've done is you and your husband Manny have written a book that basically I think is a wonderful. If you're looking for a great witness talk at a marriage preparation, retreat or event, here's an entire book that has that kind of, quality stories that relate to practical tips. And I wonder if you could say a few other words about it, Karee, and I'll invite other people to get their copies if they're interested.
Well, yeah, as Jared said, it is not a workbook. It is a full text. What it does have at the end of every chapter is discussion questions. So it can function within a small group or even a larger class, depending on how it's structured. And we will be offering eventually a series of worksheets on my blog, which the blog is called Can We Cana. So I will be offering worksheets. It won't be as extensive as an entire workbook, but I will have worksheets that correspond to every one of the 12 chapters and go a little more in depth than the discussion questions at the end of the chapter. As for when it's going to be offered for sale, technically the launch is April 7th, but actually I believe Amazon and Barnes & Noble are offering it in paperback form now. You can't get the Kindle version until the formal launch date, though. And the next question that you had about multiple copies, Ave Maria Press does have a bulk discount available that I think will get you an even better price in this special offer if you go to the Ave Maria Press website and you type in the promo code 4KEYS, that's the number 4, K-E-Y-S, and you purchase more than 5 copies, you'll get a bit of a steeper discount than the one you see on that screen.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, we, as Karee mentioned, we have Ave Maria Press offers a bulk discount. So if you're to order, multiple copies, you'll get an additional discount. In addition to what we're seeing here, this is the promo code that you can use in connection with this webinar. There's the promo code KEYS, K-E-Y-S. When you can type that into the promo code section and get it the book for $12. And as Karee mentioned, it's already for sale at AveMariaPress.com and as well as Ave Maria, or excuse me, at Amazon. If you want to get a better discount. This would be the way to go. And we'll send this out again with the recording later on this week, but we wanted to at least share this with you here at the webinar. Karee, before we close, I just want to, again, thank you once again. Can you tell us your blog? Multiple people have asked for your blog name again, and maybe the best place to find that would be great, or find you even.
Sure. The title of the blog is Can We Cana? That's 3 words. Can We Cana, spelled C-A-N-A. And then a question mark. That's, of course, a reference to the miracle of turning water into wine at the wedding of Cana. And the URL is canwecana.blogspot.com. And blogspot is spelled B-L-O-G-S-P-O-T.
And I'll make sure and link that up on the recording page as well, so you'll hopefully everyone get a copy of that or a link to that in an email later this week. So Karee, again, thanks so much for the presentation, and really appreciate you giving us your insights into how we can do marriage prep a little bit better, especially in the modern world and the situation we're in with the church today.
Thank you so much, Jared.
Well, I want to say a quick, once again, thank you to our partners in this series, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. You can see their websites displayed on the screen here, so please go check them out if you're not already a member of any of these organizations. Feel free to connect with Ave Maria Press at any of the most popular social networks, including YouTube and Vimeo, where the recording of this webinar will be placed when we finish today. You can also find the links to all of the recordings of all past webinars dating back for a number of years here, avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. And once again, I'd like to invite you to the next webinar in this series. I'll actually be the one presenting next Tuesday on April 12th. We'll be talking about evangelization essentials, and we'll be giving you some quick, easy to implement strategies on how to get started in evangelization in your parish and in your own personal life. It's based on a book that I just written called To Heal, Proclaim, and Teach. So I'm excited to be back, not as moderator, but also as a presenter next Tuesday. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. And Karee, once again, finally, thanks for your presentation and giving us your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
All right. God bless everybody.